welcome everybody. This is Football Talk. Whether you're on the East Coast, West Coast, or watching around the world, this is Hawk Talk on a Blue Friday. We are back in the mix of football. So it's good to have football back, even if it's not quite regular season experiences. Off season felt like it was long this year, and so it's great to get back into the swing of things. And we got some game film to talk about from last week. We got the game against the Cowboys coming up. Obviously, I have to take a minute and acknowledge our sponsors. So if you are in the Seattle area, you go downtown to Pike Place Market, go down to El Cajon. It is a Peruvian restaurant. A friend of mine has that. Beautiful spot. Definitely get in there if you want to try out some Peruvian food. It is awesome. So check that out, and let's get rolling. So week one of preseason is now in the books, and it was preseason for everybody because if you were watching the local broadcast, King 5 also had some issues. They were multiple times throughout the broadcast having technical difficulties where we got a blue screen. If you were on any of the affiliate stations, obviously they were also having problems because they're just rebroadcasting King 5 stuff. So hopefully they get their stuff figured out because, that was a frustrating thing to watch. Fortunately, it's a preseason game, so if you missed something, it wasn't the end of the world, but you definitely don't want to see that as the year goes on. So the Hawks come out with the win, 24-13. 24-13 over the Vikings, and it was a little bit of a slow start. They were behind 10-0 to the Vikings, and they did battle their way back, which is encouraging. None of the rookies were, down or considering themselves out or anything like that. So it was good to see them battle back. You didn't see much from the starters. They were basically either sitting or, in the case of guys like Walker, they were still injured, so they're not getting any playing time. I actually thought we were going to see a little bit more from DJ Dallas, but he, I think, only had 3 or 4 snaps altogether. So I was a little bit surprised to see that Brian Koback was getting the bulk of the carries. He had it 75 yards on 9 touches. So, he had a productive day. And I imagine that you're going to see him more this week against the Cowboys. You're not going to see Charbonnet probably. You're probably still not going to see Walker. It's the second game of preseason. This is basically all depth. Whether guys were starting, their starters last week or not, this week you're going to see very few starters. Outside of a couple of teams, like the Broncos will probably run their starters back out there just because they didn't look very good last week. And so I imagine they will want to try and get some more reps with that first unit. But by and large, most of the league is not going to have a lot of starters out there this week. This is a big week where they have to start thinking of cuts. You start the preseason with 90 guys on the roster. You got to end the preseason with your 53-man roster. So this is a week where you see a lot of guys probably start getting cut after these games this weekend, especially if you're making some bad plays. Like if you watched the game last night, there was a chance at the end of the game to run an out route, have basically 1 second left on the clock, and the receiver took a step inside. Game ends as a tie, and that's a good way, especially if you're an undrafted free agent, something like that. That's a good way to end up working at Target next week. So any kind of plays like that are going to be huge, especially this week, because, again, it's going to be mostly depth. You're not going to see a lot of starters because this is a huge week for coaches to see that lower level talent and, whether or not they're going to make that 53-man roster, potentially get into like a practice squad situation, or if they're just finding their way out of the league altogether and they got to start looking at things like the USFL, XFL, CFL, stuff like that. So this is going to be a big week for the backups. But there were some things in that first game last week against the Vikings that were encouraging. JSN didn't get a ton of work, but he got 3 touches for 25 yards, and he had no problem creating space. And that is really encouraging, especially when you're going into this season where he's going to be the third option. He's going to line up in that slot. And for him to be able to get that space is going to be huge for Geno, because he's going to be able to do, obviously he can use his tight end for, shorter routes, kind of that safety valve. But JSN is going to offer that same kind of thing, obviously with a little bit more speed. So even though he didn't get a lot of touches, the touches that he did have was very encouraging. It was great to see that, the moment wasn't too big. Obviously it's preseason, so you're not necessarily going against anybody's number ones or anything like that, but that was good to watch. Drew Lock actually had a pretty efficient day too. He was 17 for 24, 191 yards, 2 touchdowns, did have a pick. Now the pick was tipped, and so that one might not have been one. That being said, there was one earlier that probably should have been picked. We just had a receiver get his hand on it. So, I mean, either way, he probably would have ended up with 1 interception. That being said, it was a pretty efficient day. Locke looked good, especially as the backup out there. So I'm encouraged to see that come along. Locke was also a good re-signing just because you were able to get him cheap, had a year in the system already. And so if something were to happen to Geno, I feel pretty comfortable with him being able to come in and, at least potentially get us a win here or there. It's not like he played horrendously when he was in, with the Broncos. So I liked some of the things that I saw out of Drew Lock. He mostly made pretty good decisions. He had a few where you kind of wish he would have maybe just thrown the ball away. But again, some good looks there. There was also some guys that probably aren't going to make this team that I really liked what I saw out of them. So one of them is Bryant Kobeck. He had the ball. He got 75 yards on 9 touches. And, it was impressive to watch, mostly because this is a really crowded running back room at this point with a lot of talent. There's 2 second-round picks to start it off. Then you have a veteran like DJ Dallas who runs hard. You got McIntosh back there, also a good runner. So he would be that 5th back. There's no way they're carrying 5 into the season. So this is one where he's probably going to get a lot of work in this preseason. I expect him to mostly carry the load against the Cowboys, but he's probably not actually playing for the Seahawks when the season comes around. He might be on the practice squad, but I believe he will end up on someone's depth chart, just based on how he ran this week. Now, if that can remain true over the next 2 games, who knows? That's why they play the games, right? So we can see what it is they have. But if he can continue with this type of level, I still don't think he makes the active roster for the Hawks, but there's probably another team that would pick him up before he lands on their practice squad. So one thing that was a little bit of a concern is there clearly isn't great depth at the linebacker position. We didn't roll our starters out for the linebackers, so we were mostly looking at depth, and they didn't look great. So, and they're going to have a pretty good test against the Cowboys this coming week because it's going to be very similar. You're going to be mostly looking at depth. Obviously, you don't need the starters that you had, and guys like Bobby Wagner, you don't need them out there. You know what they are. They're a known quantity. They play well. They play fast. They tackle. So they're not going to get a lot of preseason work, especially in this particular game. They'll get some work next week, but that linebacker depth is going to be crucial to watch this week, just because the Cowboys do have some nice depth at tight end. Obviously they can run the ball. They got, their rookie who's going to get some touches on Saturday, that in Deuce Vaughn. So you're going to be looking at that depth really from the front 7. So from your defensive line, from that linebacking core, on whether or not they can stop up Deuce Vaughn. He's a shifty runner. He's quick. Obviously one of the big storylines is he's short. So it's going to be hard to pick him up until he hits the line. And so it's really going to be imperative that they wrap up, make clean tackles. Don't throw a shoulder at him. One of the things with guys that are short, low center of gravity, so they can usually bounce off of a shoulder hit. So, it's going to be really imperative that they wrap up. Boya Mafe looked good. We're hoping to see that second year jump from him. He was a pretty solid guy last year. He looked good in last week's preseason game, but you want to see more out of him. Obviously, again, that's that side of the ball that they struggled on last year. So you want to see some growth. You need to see some growth, because that was a unit that was absolutely getting smacked last year. They were giving up almost 200 yards a game, and you definitely need some progress. Obviously, they brought in some guys during free agency and the draft, but you need the guys that are still on the roster to also take that step up. So that's going to be a spot to really kind of look at too. And then there was a receiver that's going to be, way down the depth chart as well in Jake Bobo, former UCLA receiver, had 3 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown. So that's another guy you kind of hope can make that 53-man roster. Again, that receiving room, similar to that running back room, has a ton of talent. There's quite a bit of depth in it. And so making the 53-man roster might be hard. Naturally, you're going to see more work out of him this week and next week to, see if he can get that lower edge of the 53-man roster. But man, I feel bad I don't really feel bad for him. It's an embarrassment of riches, really. But you feel bad for the coaches having to cut guys, because there's going to be guys that are waived from this team that are too good to not be on a roster. So you're going to end up probably playing against them later in the season when they find somewhere else to, jump onto. Realistically, I think that you're going to have a few of these guys that don't make our squad end up probably with teams like the Rams, who don't have a lot of cap space, who might dump a veteran player to be able to sign some of these undrafted free agents that have to get cut from other teams that just have a lot of talent. So you may see teams like the Rams actually get a little bit better even without having to spend much money, because this is a guy that, based on the routes he was running, what he was able to do with the ball, he could definitely make a roster somewhere. It probably won't be here in Seattle, though. Or if it is, it's a practice squad guy, or he's that 5th receiver, maybe. So, if he's on there, he's barely on there. And then, we got, of course, we have our week questions. So every week I make sure that I send out a tweet and ask whatever topic, questions, theory that you want my take on. I try and include as many of those during this show as I can every week. And generally they're pretty fun questions. One of them was, the first one is an obvious yes. Am I excited about the throwback jerseys? And of course, I'm an 80s kid. So that was the uniforms they were in when I started watching football. I grew up at a time where I was watching Dave Craig and Steve Largent and, all those guys, Brian Blades. And so I got to watch them play in the Kingdome in these uniforms. So it's cool to see them come back. I'm a little bummed that they're only doing it for one game, because I know some of the other throwback teams are doing it for at least 2. And so for the Hawks to only do the one, it's too bad, but they're going to be rocking the green jerseys again. So that takes one of those spots. I'm not a huge fan of the action green, but most people seem to like it more than I do. That being said, the throwbacks are, I'm a big fan of. Had to get the throwback helmet. So, it just little things like that. It's cool to see some of those things from when I was a kid. I definitely got to grab one of those jerseys If you haven't seen one of the Seahawk throwback jerseys, the tag in the back where it tells you the size is actually the Kingdome logo. So very cool. Excited to pick one of those up at some point this season. So, all right, let's get into some of these other questions. Do I think we see Charbonnet this week? Probably not. You know, he had that shoulder injury through camp. So they're probably mostly going to save him until sometime in the third preseason game. I don't think we see him or Walker. Walker's still injured. So like I said earlier, I don't think we really see much of DJ Dallas either. It's going to be Bryant Koback. Had a good week against the Vikings. We're going to see if he can do it again against the Cowboys. There are some spots to run on that defense, so he could have a decent day. And then similarly, are we going to see Geno? Definitely not. We're going to see more of Drew Lock. Lock had a pretty efficient day. They're going to let Lock go back out there. We're probably not going to see Geno until he'll likely play 2 or 3 series in the first quarter next week, and then probably the first series coming out of halftime. And that is generally about all you're going to see out of the starters, especially the way the Seahawks tend to run their preseason. So we'll probably get 4 series next week out of Geno, and that'll be about it. You may not see Walker or Charbonnet the entire preseason, but if you do see Charbonnet, it'll only be for maybe a series, just to get him ready for the speed. But again, those guys that have been injured, just like McIntosh, you're probably not going to see McIntosh either. So I would say all 3 games, you're mostly going to see Koback. But yeah, so for this week, definitely not. What do I think of our secondary? The secondary is impressive. It would be better if our front 7 was going to take a bigger jump than I think they're going to. Now, granted, they were the 30th ranked defense last year, and that front 7 was absolutely getting torched all season. So with them making the jump they're probably going to make, which I think they're going to be about the 14th or 15th ranked defense. But it's going to be really hard to throw over the top because you're going to have, a couple of Pro Bowlers returning. You got Diggs coming back. You got last year's runner-up defensive rookie of the year in Tariq Woolen. We have our new corner, Witherspoon. You got Neal or Love, I should say. You got Love back there at safety as well. And then they're moving Kobe Bryant to safety, which he had a game against the Vikings. One of the first plays, he came down and he absolutely blasted somebody. So you want to see that aggressiveness out of him. The touchdown that they got was kind of on him. So, there's some things he has to work on, but he's making the transition from corner to safety. So there's going to be a few things that he misses along the way. And then continuing on in that secondary, you still have Michael Jackson, who played really well last year, opposite of Woolen. So there's a lot of things that are really encouraging about this secondary. I hear is this the second coming of Legion of Boom? We got to pump the brakes on that. They're going to be good. But again, the Legion of Boom also had stars up front, and some of that helps that secondary with, opportunities because they're able to get those pressures and sacks and stuff like that. So you end up with passes that are, off target, or they sail a little bit, or they're a little late. And that helps that secondary make those plays, whether they're, deflected passes or interceptions or whatever. So some of those things won't be quite as good as during that era, just because they don't have that same support up front. And as much as I love, corners and safeties and everything, I mean, everything comes off the guys up front, right? Like the line, if you don't have a good defensive line or you don't have a good offensive line, I don't care how good your receivers are or your secondary is, you just don't get the same opportunities, because if a quarterback has all day to run, or I mean, all day to throw, even the best defenders can't stick with a receiver forever, right? So if they have a ton of time back there to throw the ball, then your defense ultimately gets picked apart. So I think the secondary is going to be extraordinarily good. I think the front seven is going to be okay. And that's why I say they're going to be kind of a middle of the road defense. But if the offense can stick with what it was last year until guys started getting hurt, they were a top 5 scoring offense. So if they can be anywhere near that and take the jump that they did from defense, it's going to be a very tough team to play. Let's see. We got who on this team would you pick in fantasy? So I could see picking up maybe Walker as a flex guy. You wouldn't want him as your starting running back, I don't think, only because one, it's going to be a two-headed monster. They're going to use Charbonnet this season for sure. The other thing is, he did end up getting hurt. So I don't know if you want to keep him as your first guy. I tend to if I'm going to have a guy that I want to start, I kind of want them to be the back, right? Anytime you have a tandem back setup, something like that, where you're splitting touches, it's going to be hard to get the yardage and the points because you're going to have those weeks where they may get some yardage and then they do change of pace at the goal line, and your guy doesn't get the score because you have a tandem back setup. So if I had to pick somebody for fantasy, it would probably be Walker for a flex, or maybe Lockett in that flex position too. Just because anytime you have a lot of talent, they're going to move the ball around a lot. And so you're just not going to get the numbers that you probably would like to have. Okay. Explain my Pick'em championship. So every week on Thursday morning, I do the Pick'em for the week. Obviously almost every week has Thursday night football. So that's when your picks would lock for the week. And it's straight up. You're picking the winner of each game. I ended up winning last year, but yeah, and it's $10 buy-in. It's $50 to win. 7 of the positions at least get their money back. So the first, if you take first, it's $50. Second is 25. Third is 15. And then 4 through 6 get their money back. And if you are just horrendously bad at Pick'em and you finish last, you also get your money back. So it's always a lot of fun. I go through every Thursday morning, do my Pick'em. So you'll actually know what my picks are before you even have to lock yours in. I always put a sheet out too that shows all my picks. So you get to cheat a little bit on whether or not you want to pick with me or against me. Because you don't have to wait for everything to lock to see what my picks were. I let you know what mine are straight up front. But yeah, that's more or less how it is. I'm doing it on the CBS platform this year instead of Pool Host, only because they have so many ads on Pool Host. I was told that on mobile, it was really hard to navigate, and the CBS one tends to work a little smoother. So that's why that one is there. You can follow me on Twitter, or you can look at on my channel here, one of the Pick'em ones, and it has the link to it if you want to sign up and join in and play against me. So yeah, that's more or less how Pick'em works. Let's see, we got, let's see, what do I think of the O-line ranking being between 28th and 31st? So I don't think they're going to be as bad as people are making them out to be. We do have a lot of young guys, but I mean, we have our 2 tackles that were rookies last year that played out of their minds. We did pick up a center in free agency. We picked up a center and a guard during the draft. They've all had really good camps. So I expect good things out of them. Do I think it's going to be an elite offensive line? No, but there's no way they're going to be as bad as that, because that's more or less where they finished last year. And they had some very real holes on that offensive line and some injuries. So I'm not really sure why they're ranked so low. but I would rather them be ranked lower than they're going to be than, have hype around them that they don't live up to. So, if you want to underrate our team, awesome. I much prefer that anyway. But yeah, I don't think they're going to be that bad. The offensive line is still not going to be, it's not going to be the Jets. It's not going to be the Eagles. It's not going to be that elite type offensive line. It's going to be similar to the defensive, front. It's going to kind of be middle of the road, but good enough to, win games. So I don't love where it's ranked, but again, if they outperform it, great, right? So yeah, that's kind of the way I look at it there. So and then I was asked what I think we're gonna finish the preseason with. We are probably gonna finish the preseason 2-1. This is a game that they could drop. Again, it's going to be all backups. And so it's just going to be who makes the least amount of mistakes tomorrow. So, man, yeah, it's rookies. So you just really never know. But so that's kind of through the questions for this week. And then, so we got the Cowboys coming to town. And they do have a solid team and they have some pretty good depth. So some of the things that I'm looking for, kind of keys to the game for me, is I want to see how our linebacking depth and our defensive line depth work against their rush offense, because excuse me, they're going to have Deuce Vaughn out there, right? So we need to be able to see if they can lock him down, if they can keep him from moving around, because again, he's a shifty runner. This is going to be mostly our backup depth. So we also need to see if they can, get in and provide some pass defense as well. So I'm really looking on that defensive side of the ball on whether or not they can get back there. The Jaguars were able to numerous times last week against Dallas. So hopefully they can generate some of those situations. We'll be looking at edge rushing as well, just because, again, it's something that they've really lacked over the last couple of seasons, and we need to see more of that. Like I said before, a good quarterback can absolutely carve you up if they have all day back there. And I don't think that Dak is elite by any means, but he's good enough to damage you if he has some time. So granted, Dak isn't going to be out there, but the premise holds true. The locks accuracy, I think, is something else I'm going to look for in this game. Decision making is key, obviously, but I want to see more accurate throws, him get a little more comfortable. There was a couple of throws that I thought really kind of got away from him last week, and I'd like to see some of that corrected, especially with how opportunistic this Dallas defense can be. So if he can dial some of those things down, be a little more consistent in that passing game, it'd be nice to see. I liked how aggressive Kobe Bryant was. Again, where he got lost was kind of in coverage there, but him coming down and really coming to hit, right? He was playing aggressive. I really like to see that. I kind of give him a little bit of a pass on that protection issue. Again, they've moved him from corner to safety, so he's kind of learning on the fly here. So from last week to this week, I want to see kind of that step forward. Maybe not get lost in coverage quite the way he did. Because he's got some live reps, another week of practice. Start to button that up. He's not going to be a starting safety by any means, but when he comes in relief or whatever, I want to be able to trust that we're not just going to get burned over the top when he comes in. So that's one of the keys to the game that I'm going to look for as well. Like I said before, Kovac is going to get a heavy load of work this time around, just because we have Walker and McIntosh injured. Charbonnet is technically able to play, but you don't want to roll him out early and potentially re-injure the shoulder. So, and DJ Dallas may get a little more work this week, but probably not a ton, just because we don't know when Walker and McIntosh might be back. So they may miss the first part of this, the first game or two of the season. So you don't want to put DJ Dallas in too much of harm's way either, because he'll probably share the load with Charbonnet to start the season if Walker isn't ready. So Kobeck may very well be that guy. And if they end up having to lean on him that way, I believe they will probably try and find a way to keep him on the team. Excuse me. Can the linebackers cover Ferguson in the middle of the field? So that is a good question. Ferguson was able to do some work against that Jacksonville defense, and that was a huge area of concern last season. Basically, if you had a tight end that ran a seam, a slant, a curl, anything like that, was kind of wide open in the middle of the field last year for Seattle. So I want to see how this really how this linebacking core can adjust to that, especially because it's all going to be the depth, right? So I'm a little worried that the drop off from our first string to the second string, especially in that linebacking core, is going to be a huge drop. And so I hope that they get a lot of reps over the next couple of weeks to try and school them up and get them up to speed, because you don't want to have to worry about a guy, going down and the next guy coming in is basically a hole in that defense. So hopefully we see some good things, some good growth out of this, young linebacking core. Again, I mean, it's one of those, these guys are all like second, third year outside of Bobby Wagner that, or rookies. So, I mean, they're all very young. They're going to make mistakes. So some of those you just have to live with. And some of them, you're going to look at and think, man, they should have been able to coach through that. But, ultimately it's kind of the thing you have with a lot of rookies on a team. What's really nice about it is most of this team is going to be able to stay intact for the next 2-3 years at least. So that's encouraging if you're a Hawks fan, because they've kind of already overperformed what you thought they were probably going to. Last season, a lot of people thought that the Hawks were going to be one of the worst teams in the league. I didn't think they were going to be quite that bad. I had that as a 7-win team. They ended up with 9 going to the playoffs. It's awesome. This year, I think they take a step forward, but not a huge one. It's going to be probably a 10-win season. I say that mostly because the units that were bad last year are going to take a step forward, but we have a harder schedule this year. And so even though it's going to be a better team than it was last season, it's probably not going to equate into a ton more wins, just because the competition you're going against is some of the better teams in the NFC this year on the schedule. So, it's just part of how the scheduling works. So those are kind of the highlights that I'm looking for going into Saturday's game. And so every week, again, make sure that you send me your questions, any theories that you have that you want my that you want my input on. And be sure also to like and subscribe my channel here. Do this every week. Other than that, I'm going to be visiting some friends up in the beautiful Victoria, BC this weekend. So I will mostly be MIA, but I will be back at it Monday morning with my buddy, Mr. U, and 6 a.m. on the West Coast, 9 a.m. on the East Coast. And so wake up with us, have some coffee, and we will talk about everything that happened this weekend in the NFL. Other than that, you guys enjoy your weekend, and have a good one, everyone.